David, can we just start by getting your reaction then to the violence we've seen over the last 2 days?
Yeah, it's a tragedy what's happening, and unfortunately it's happening because Hamas is trying to infiltrate Israel with thousands of people trying to storm into Israel, and it's shooting rockets, and it's laying bombs, and it's shooting guns, and Israel is simply defending itself from this onslaught. And of course it's particularly dangerous because of what Hamas is, a terrorist organization that openly declares its aim to destroy Israel and openly calls for genocide of Jews. So this is outrageous what's happening, and Hamas is clearly to blame.
You don't see this as an overreaction because on the other side of the argument people say people are protesting, but we're seeing people with Molotov cocktails, they're throwing stones, and in response they're getting fired at with live ammunition and tank shells, and 17 people have been killed.
Well, I've been to many protests in my time, and at none of the protests I've been to have people shot rockets, have people tried to infiltrate a sovereign state, or have people tried to lay bombs in order to kill as many civilians as possible. The aim of this event is to swarm into Israel and to overwhelm it. And it's part of a long track record of Hamas waging war against Israel, launching tens of thousands of missiles, conducting suicide bombings against cafes and against civilians and in buses. This is what Hamas is. They don't hide their aim. The leadership of Hamas is very clear. They say openly, like Ahmed Bahar, the Deputy Speaker of the Parliament, says, we will kill every Jew down to the very last one. And Ismail Haniyeh and Mahmoud al-Zahar openly declare that Jews are vermin and cancer, and therefore we will wipe them from the face of the earth. That's what this is about, and it needs to stop. And the real tragedy is that it can stop now. There doesn't need to be any bloodshed. There doesn't need to be any killings. There doesn't need to be any injured. All Hamas has to do is say, stay away from the security fence, don't try to infiltrate Israel, and all of it can stop immediately.
Why doesn't that happen, do you think? Because we've got, what, 6 weeks ahead of us now, and if we go by the record death toll that we've seen already, hundreds will be killed during this period. Why is there this sort of impasse of trying to find peace?
Well, it's not exactly an impasse. It's one side waging war against the other. All you have to do is listen to the leadership of Hamas. For example, Mahmoud al-Zahar, just to give you one example, said that Jews were wild beasts and wild dogs, and Hamas's deputy religious endowments minister said that only a madman would think of Jews as human. And from their charter on down to every statement they have, they say we will annihilate Israel. Not just that, they cynically use children and women and civilians, and they're proud of that fact. It was Hamas's interior minister, Fatih Ahmed, who said he was proud that women, children, and the elderly formed a human shield. And we just saw in this latest event that Hamas sent a 7-year-old girl to try to be shot right by Israel's security fence. Think about what that says about an organization, that it uses innocent, impressionable children in order to achieve its war aims. That tells you everything you need to know about Hamas. So the whole world should be asking Hamas, why aren't you telling your people to stop this outrage? Why do you continue to wage war against Israel? Because the second that Hamas says that, all of this can stop.
They've asked their people to stay, I think, I might be wrong, but something like 500 metres away from the fence and conduct this as a peaceful protest.
Well, it isn't very peaceful when you look at the images of bombs being planted right at the fence and of people shooting rockets and guns at Israelis. That is the opposite of a peaceful protest. If this was a peaceful protest, there would be no problem whatsoever. Protests are great, but attempts to swarm into Israel and to overrun it with thousands of people are not great.
Dave, you're using this phrase, thousands swarm into Israel. Can you back that up with evidence that you've seen over the last few days? I'm not denying that that might be the case, but the pictures I see people standing maybe 20, 30 metres away from the fence throwing stones. I don't see thousands of people rampaging through a fence or people firing rockets. So please, can you just give some examples that you've seen?
Sure. Well, first of all, a large stone thrown at someone's head can kill them, as has happened in the past. But there's no reason for someone to be 20 meters away from the fence. And if you look at the pictures, you see people walking directly up to the fence, trying to infiltrate. A peaceful protest, this is not. We know what peaceful protests look like, and they don't involve people taking guns and shooting at the other side, namely at Israelis. But it's no surprise because this is nothing new. Hamas has been digging terror tunnels for years to try to kill Israeli civilians. Hamas has been openly calling for genocide. Hamas has launched thousands of missiles. Hamas has detonated suicide bombings in buses and cafes. And Hamas openly declares its aim to annihilate Israel. So it's pretty much the antithesis of a peaceful protest.
With regard to people firing rockets and people firing guns at the Israeli Defence Forces, do you have numbers there? Or, I mean, is there a barrage of rockets? Is it just one rocket that's gone over? Can you give us more context?
There's been many attacks. The exact numbers still being investigated because there were many actions taken. Some people tried to infiltrate, some people tried to shoot. It's on video. You can just go to the IDF's website and you can see the video for yourself. But even one event like this is too many, and all of it could have been prevented had Hamas merely said, we are staying away from the fence, we don't want people to swarm into Israel, and we'll have a peaceful protest. Had they said that, not a single person would have been killed, but any state would defend itself by people shooting rockets and shooting guns at its citizens.
The US Embassy is looking to relocate, I think, to Jerusalem and open in May. That's caused a lot of tension too. Do you suspect violence could get worse in the run-up to that?
I hope not. I think what's been causing the tension has been the denial of the fact that Jerusalem is Israel's capital, not the recognition of a historical fact that stretches back 3,000 years, the time it's been the capital of the Jewish people, in 70 years, the amount of time that Jerusalem has been the capital of Israel. So this is a wonderful move for peace. It's a wonderful move for justice. It's a wonderful move for history, the simple recognition of a simple yet profound fact that Jerusalem is and will always be the capital of Israel.
Although, I mean, that in itself is a contentious statement regarding, depending on who you talk to, isn't it? I mean, that's the whole issue here, this great debate about the ownership of Jerusalem.
Well, it's not just the ownership of Jerusalem that's contested. If you ask the leaders of Hamas, every inch of Israel needs to be conquered, and Israel needs to be destroyed in totality. All you need to do is Google Hamas and their statements, what they say publicly, what they say in Arabic, and you'll see a clear record that what they call for is the destruction of Israel. They also call for the annihilation of all Americans. Ahmed Bahar said that he hopes every American dies. This is a terrorist organization which is recognized as such around the world, which has killed so many people. And they continue to kill people because it's the essence of their ideology. Conquest, tyranny, terror, and war.
David, would you admit we're locked in a vicious cycle here?
I don't think you call it a cycle when one side attacks and one side responds. I think that Israel is responding to outrageous provocations by a war machine called Hamas, whose stated aim is the destruction of Israel. It's not a cycle when Hamas launches tens of thousands of missiles and says, we will annihilate your state, and you respond. It's not a cycle when suicide bombers detonate themselves in cafes and buses, and you send forces to try to stop those suicide bombers. That is not a cycle of violence. That is war waged by one side and defense waged by the other.
So what are your hopes for peace, David? What has to happen?
Well, I'm very hopeful about peace, and all it requires is a very simple recognition that Israel isn't going anywhere, that Israel's outstretched hand for peace should be taken, and that serious negotiations can begin immediately with the Palestinian Authority. Unfortunately, Israel's outstretched hand has been turned down every single time. President Abbas refuses to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu. President Abbas is paying salaries to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars a year to people who have committed vicious and horrific acts of terror against civilians. And President Abbas continues to reject Israel's fundamental right to exist. And so that's why peace hasn't moved forward. I hope that changes. The Prime Minister hopes that changes, and all Israelis hope that that changes.
And finally, just a message then to people that are concerned about further deaths, certainly over the next few weeks.
Well, as I said before, this can stop. This can stop this very second. All it requires is for Hamas to say, don't approach the fence and don't try to swarm into Israel by the thousands, and stop shooting missiles and gunfire at Israelis. The moment that is said, all of this goes away. There doesn't need to be any more bloodshed. That is our ardent hope, and hopefully the world will pressure Hamas to cease this senseless war that has continued for far too long against Israel. And the Palestinian people are also paying the price by the fact that Hamas is stealing so much of money that should be invested in schools and roads and hospitals, and instead uses it to build terror tunnels to dig under the homes of civilians. That's outrageous, and it really needs to stop now.